Welcome to the Liberty Alert with Gregory Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C., a program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking two-kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C., and friends of the program all around the country. I'm Gregory Seltz. Welcome to the Liberty Alert, where every week we try to cut through the noise and take on the issues, especially the public issues that matter to people of faith. You know, we try to rely on the wisdom of the Word for the sake of the culture and the mission of the church. Or as we like to say at the LCRL, we're trying to put our temporal liberties to work for the sake of the eternal liberties of God for all. Today, we're privileged to be with Dr. Edward Veith, and he's been described this way as an author, a scholar, and a professor of literature, emeritus at Patrick Henry College. Also, he was a faculty member at Concordia Mequon, and he's the director of the Cranach Institute. And also, he wrote, I think I've got this right, he wrote for World Magazine. Gene, how do you keep busy with yourself?
Well, I retired finally so that I can still have time to keep busy with all these other things. My question is, how was I able to keep a full-time job and do all the things I got involved in? But somehow I managed.
Well, I'll tell you, I've read a lot of your stuff, and that's one of the reasons I want to have you on the program today. Also, you've written for our Word from the Center Fridays, and we really appreciate that, and can't wait to. We always look forward to what you have to say in those two Kingdom op-eds. Because those really do bless our people. But I did want to talk about it. This is an ancient book. I know that. It's almost 20 years old now. But there's so much in this book that was forward-looking, and I think it actually applies very readily to today. And the book is Christianity in an Age of Terrorism, and you wrote that pretty much right after 9/11. I know it wasn't immediate, but it was pretty close. And you know, it's been a while, but I guess the question I have for you in general is, what has changed since then?
Well, I think the book holds up in many ways, but it's striking. Right after 9/11, the country was so unified, everybody pulling together, everybody in shock. We've lost that unity for sure.
Right.
But we were praising the police, praising the first responders for what they did and for just their heroism and running into those burning buildings and trying to save people. It was so moving. Now, national mood is defund the police or even disband the police.
Right. Well, I actually say, you know, honestly, in my work on the Hill, I think they're trying to federalize the police, which is a whole different move. But again, you're right. Yeah. We've gone from this unity. We've almost gone from the notion that America was attacked to America is the problem, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's gone so far that, the big difference is we were attacked by the Islamic terrorists, held up and supported by the Taliban. And now just recently, we've been driven out of Afghanistan. They've won, so to speak. And it's almost like a complete inversion, a reverse of what happened in the aftermath of 9/11. But the climate is different. Postmodernism at first, which I've written about a lot and did back since 1994, it was a tolerance. All the religions are the same. It doesn't matter what you believe as long as you believe it. All positions are equally valid. Morality is something that people have different kinds of morality. They're all valid. There was a moment after 9/11 when the country was talking differently. Well, maybe all religions are not the same.
Right.
Maybe there's a difference between this radical Islam committed to jihad and manifesting itself in the attacks on 9/11 and Christianity, which has a very different view. Maybe there really is a true morality, that some things are actually evil, like killing thousands of innocent people, and some things are actually objectively good, like trying to save their lives. Now you still have that other worldview that but it's different. It's not tolerance anymore. One of the things that happened was that at first we were thinking about the difference between Islam and Christianity.
Right.
But then the problem was not Islam, but fundamentalism.
Well,
And then the target shifted to Christian fundamentalism, by
right.
which they anybody that believed in any objective religious teaching or moral teaching at all.
See, that's what I think that's where you're going with that. I love that, is because how did the Christian worldview still is pretty dominant in America. At least it's infused in our politics, and we can talk about that another time. It's not that we're a Christian nation, but these Christian moral principles or this worldview is there. How does that worldview suddenly become just as damaging to our country as the very people who bombed our planes? That's what's so scary to me. Now Christianity is the enemy.
That's right. That's right. And there is no tolerance anymore.
Right.
Now it's intolerant for certainly religious views that are too conservative, which they associate with the Taliban and Christian but also moral intolerance has grown. It's not a intolerance against, based on traditional morality. It's that those who do not believe in gay rights or same-sex marriage or transgenderism, they are the immoral ones.
Right.
And those became a symbol of the new kind of self-righteousness. It's a self-righteousness without righteousness. But those who hold to traditional beliefs, those are considered bad.
Yeah.
And so it's a moral inversion that's taken place, but it's the same kind of zeal. I think you've talked about the new secular Puritanism.
Yes.
And that's what it is. And it's just as legalistic, and there's no forgiveness in it. No matter how long ago or whatever any repentance anybody shows, it's just.
Yeah, and the solution they espouse is the power of the state. And that's why one of your chapters in that book I thought was amazing, because you talked about the principles of a terrorist organization or maybe a terrorist state, and you said things like this: they're collectivists, they believe they're victims and aggrieved, they don't believe in objective reason, and they do believe in the power of the state to solve all their problems. That sounds like a political party today in our midst, which scares me, right?
It does. Now, here's the irony. Muslims have lived for centuries without any big violent clashes between Christianity. Certainly, there were a lot back in the Renaissance period, in the Crusades, and so on. But there haven't been for such a long time. One of the things I pointed out is that the 9/11 terrorists, and still a lot of the terrorists since then, one thing they have in common is they're Muslim, yes, but they also went to Western universities.
How about that?
Where they were taught these really Western ideas, postmodern, post-Marxist ideas about oppression, how, again, you hear a lot about critical race theory, whereas Marx focused on economic oppression between social classes, the post-Marxists focus on other kinds of groups oppressing other groups.
Right. So they actually merged their ideology with classical Islam, and they made kind of a hyper jihadist move on the West.
The postmodernists in the West have done something similar.
Right.
And here's the big question, the big puzzle. When you look at the contemporary intellectual establishment, any Christian who's critical of homosexuality or transgenderism or any of these things is just terrible, as a horrible monster who needs to be canceled and ruined. But they're strangely still sympathetic to radical Islam.
Right.
And Islam is far harsher against homosexuals and these other things than Christians are.
Well, look what's happened, when we left. I mean, like you said, we just left Pakistan. Look what just happened to the people that were left behind. I mean, now they're under a 6th century regime again. And we aren't, I don't know, we're not shocked by that. And
the oppression of women, Christians are accused of that. But the oppression of women in Islam is unfathomable. And yet today's Western left, today's Western universities are almost silent about that. Well, that's just their culture.
Right.
And it's just a curious contradiction in within kind of Western thought. I mean, the idea is, well, they've been colonized. It's the West has oppressed them, and they have a right to fight back. And yet it completely contradicts their whole ideology when it comes to other things.
Well, supposedly, that's one of the things I love about, I think, is it not Jordan Peterson. And he talks about this. He says, I'm done with this. Postmoderns hide behind this notion that they are loving and caring. He said their ideology, and I've been arguing this for a long time, their ideology has over 100 million innocent deaths, on their data sheet for the last 100 or so years. And your ideology can't be benevolent if you're killing that many people. And I appreciate that, because at least it gets us to an honest conversation. Well, this is an imperfect world. We all know that. The question is, what polity, I look at it this way, what polity actually curbs our worst intentions while still giving us, incentivizing our best intentions. And I want to go to, that's the next point I want to talk about, which is, America is still unique. It really is. I mean, it's unique in all the world because it organizes people around principles rather than tribes. Now, whether we sinful people can organize around principles, that's another question. But again, it talks about limiting government. It talks about self-government. It talks about binding the government because people are good, but they're also evil at the same time. It talks about the dignity of man and the depravity of man. And so here we are. And now we're reverting to tribalism again, as if that's a better solution than being held together by principles, because you can believe in those principles from any state, from any place in the world, and come here and say, oh, yeah, I'd like to actually be self-governing. I'd like to actually live freely. So why does Christianity become the enemy in the middle of this? You would think that Christianity undergirds a lot of this, or at least supports it.
Yeah, well, it really does. And I think a lot of people are, living off the capital of Christianity, sort of like a rich heir who inherited a lot of money from his parents and after a while spends it all and it's gone. I think a lot of people in this culture are living on the principle things, the Christian views about benevolence, about caring for others.
Right.
And yet their ideology, when they talk about morality, is just the will to power, one group oppressing the other. Right now, they're casting that as saying, well, isn't this terrible? Groups should not oppress each other. Well, right. But if what they say is true, this is inevitable. It's going to happen. And the only next step from that is your group needs to seize power so you can start oppressing.
That's right. And that's actually, that's in their literature. Yeah, that's in their literature too. I mean, they actually just say the big problem is the people on the bottom just need to be on the top. I love, this is again where Jordan Peterson, he said, they keep saying that there's only hierarchies of power. He said, actually, most of the West and the world survives on hierarchies of competence. And that's still true. And I love what he said, because hierarchies of power can exist for a moment. But, if you've ever worked in a place that instills fear, real fear in people. Eventually, the people under they're trying to find ways out of it. They're trying to keep away from it. They're not producing their best. Eventually, hierarchies of pure power, they don't sustain themselves because they actually don't get the best out of people. And actually, in a competitive world, they actually aren't the best way to formulate oneself. So he makes this argument that just to say everything's hierarchical in power is actually nonsense compared to what's really out there. And again, how does that challenge? But again, Christianity somehow is now the enemy in the midst of this. That's what's crazy to me.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I read something recently about the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Right.
That's been seen as a model for discrimination and all that's bad, and wanting to waive that or get rid of it. Somebody made the proposal that it's designed to protect minority religions, not majority religions like Christianity.
Yeah, well, see, I wrote we have these, you write for our Friday op-eds, and one of the ones we wrote one time was, it's terrible when the referees start playing the game, so when they start picking and choosing who gets to score, who doesn't get to score, nobody wants to play in that game. That's, that's patently unfair, and yet that's how they talk now, right? Well, let's, moving on to, Robert Reich. So just a few years after you wrote your book, Robert Reich, who was Bill Clinton's labor secretary, and I think he now teaches at Berkeley if he's still teaching, but he wrote an article and it really pitted Christianity versus modernism. He called us pre-moderns. I don't want to read the quote on the air, but again, the last thing he says, so he's going through all these things about pre-moderns are like this and it's not really that good, and post and moderns are blah, blah, blah. And he, of course, is a modernist. But at the end, he said, terrorism will disrupt our lives, but it's not the greatest danger we face in this culture. And I went, oh my goodness, he just called us worse than terrorists in our own country. Again, should we be shocked when the DOJ is politicized, or when parents at Loudoun, Virginia, just fighting for a decent moral education for their kids, are now labeled domestic terrorists? Does that shock you?
Well, I've gotten used to it. I mean, that's kind of what I expect.
Maybe we shouldn't.
The way contemporary folks are. Yeah. But the foolishness of it is overwhelming, and the danger of it, not just to Christians, but to America and to any kind of free, decent society.
Yeah, free.
Because that can only lead to tyranny.
Right.
It can only lead to absolute government, to totalitarianism, to the squelching of everything that people of both parties and both factions and all different religions here in America have always considered so precious.
Right.
There are people that want to get rid of the very foundation of that, and into the vacuum it's going to come something very horrible.
Well, I wish people understood that, because, I remember someone was talking to me. They said, if you ask someone from China today, do you have liberty? They would say, of course we do. The government says we can do this, 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 and this. And we're going, no, that's not what we mean. We mean, do you have inalienable rights that the government cannot take away? And that's a strange thing to most of the rest of the world, that we talk this way. But Dennis Prager, he's not a Christian. I think he's a Jewish commentator on the radio. And he said this, he said, if there are pillars that keep your citizenship intact, he said, one of them is that you believe in God. And he said, if you don't believe in God, in America, act like you do, because your liberties depend on it. And I thought about that, and I said, people don't understand how that notion of being created in the image of God was so foundational to limiting the government and freeing you as a citizen. Why would you want to give that up? And I think we're at a moment where people think you can have your cake and eat it too, right?
Yeah.
But they won't.
Yeah. If there's believing in God, and the reason the totalitarians hate that so much is because it says that there's someone over and beyond and transcends the government,
right,
to which the government has to be subject and can be criticized for that. And it also gives human beings made in God's image, a value, an individual value that's beyond the collectivist sorting people out by groups and treating people by what tribe they're in.
Right.
And that's fundamentally opposed to that, and you can see why the communist and the fascist and in group after group who achieve this ultimate government power oppose Christianity so much.
Right.
And how that's what we're aiming for today.
Well, that's why I try to, and let's talk a little bit then about how do Christians deal with all this stuff? How do we engage in our culture? Because I always try to tell people, the Bible is the one that differentiates the role of Caesar and the role of the church. So if you believe in the separation, we don't use that word. We call it differentiation of church and state. That's a Christian worldview. Okay. Yeah. So, and when James Madison actually credited Luther with being like the forerunner of the Bill of Rights, I mean, that should actually, people should understand why that's true. But citizenship in the face of all of this stuff, I tend to hear people say a lot to me, oh, that's just politics. We should let that be. Don't politicize the gospel. And I'm saying, no, in this culture, Caesar, you were given as a citizen, they flipped it upside down. Caesar's not on top. Caesar's on the bottom in America. And you actually have a Caesar role to play in your own citizenship and your own management. And I said, we should take that seriously. It's a gift of God. So Christian citizenship, how should we engage? And I think you had a whole chapter kind of on that. What are some of the wisdom that you uncovered when a Christian gets involved in this stuff?
Well, again, Luther's doctrine of the two kingdoms is so helpful, and the churches that don't have that are getting into so much difficulty today because you have two extremes. Some Christians want to take over the government, be the government, and the politicizing of the gospel plays right into the hands of the enemies of Christianity.
Right.
The other extreme, though, that some of those groups say, no, we'll separate from it all. We won't have anything to do with it. And so that too is the wrong stance.
Well, yeah, because we were literally put in this culture to be we were supposed to be part of the culture. Yeah. God actually sends us in as Christians to serve.
Yeah, that's the doctrine of vocation.
Right.
Now, what we learned from the doctrine of two kingdoms, as Luther developed it, is that the church and the state are two different estates. They're two different realms. Right. And you mustn't be confused with each other. It isn't just that the churches want to control everything. The state wants to become a religion.
Right.
That's that too.
Right.
But by sorting those out, it solves a lot of problems. At the same time, though, God is the king of both kingdoms.
Correct.
And so the moral laws that God has established and written into the hearts even of Gentiles, they are valid, and we need to work for those. And it's not imposing your religion to say that the state should protect the life of unborn children. That's what the state should do. That's
their fundamental purpose.
yeah. But what the church has to say to it, though, is to proclaim the gospel of Christ's forgiveness for women who have had abortions and who've been devastated by that. But the other part of that is the doctrine of vocation is that God, as you say, we're saved for the eternal kingdom, for everlasting life. But then God sends us back into the world, into our families, into our workplaces, into our churches, into our citizenship, into our country, and that's where we're to serve. And so Christians are to be active in this culture. That doesn't mean, though, that they take it as an ultimate sort of thing, which when they do, they'll definitely be disillusioned and And,
Well, yeah, if you think the state's going to solve the problems, I don't care how much money, how much power, they can't. That's why there's a cross and a resurrection.
That's right. And yet we should work for the good of our neighbor.
Right.
And that includes good laws, good conditions, good for a neighbor, helping our neighbor support his bodily life. And that includes supporting the police and their vocation, our military, and so on. Yeah. And so the doctrine of the two kingdoms really gives a template for how Christians can live, even in a hostile culture like we're entering into now, but at the same time be salt and light in that dark world, and again serve our neighbor in the fruits of our faith are expressed there, and we grow as Christians even in the conflicts that we face.
Yeah, I try to explain when people say that, that's not our job, that's the state's job. And I said, no, you are a citizen in this country and you have citizen responsibilities. So our two kingdoms is an engagement strategy. I just want people to understand that. But we have a role to play in telling Caesar what his role is in our lives. And when he usurps that role, then we have a responsibility to put him back in his proper place. And when people say, yeah, but that's politicizing things, I said, no, that's actually keeping politics out of things, right?
That's right. Again, in America, it's amazing. In most societies, we serve our leaders, but in our system, the leaders serve us.
See, that's the big difference.
We choose our leaders. We have a say in the policies that our government carries out. And in that system, you're absolutely right. We are the rulers. Constitution says ultimate authority is invested in the people.
Right.
And so we are the rulers, and we need to decide the best way to rule, including ruling our politicians, rather than letting them rule us.
You said it correctly. This is an engagement strategy, but we have to differentiate what we mean by engaging in the political stuff and engaging in the evangelism stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, Gene, I'd love to have you back. I know you've written on education. I know you've written on postmodernism. I know you've written on, the church in the 21st century. We just touched on this movement of, terrorism, but then to have the church even defined as worse than that. I mean, we had to talk about that today, and I appreciate you being here with me.
Well, good to be with you. Enjoy our talk.
Gene, have a great day.
You too.
If you want to read more from Gene, just go to his blog, Cranach, Cranach. Type his last name, Veith, and it'll take you there, or listen in on our website every Friday, because Gene writes for us in our Word from the Center. Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRL DC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Contained there are resources to empower your public square dynamic discipleship. Or check out our weekly Word from the Center opinion piece every Friday at facebook.com/LCRL Freedom. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Gregory Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Alert with Dr. Gregory Seltz, Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.